Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Angular version 14 launch party. My name is Jessica Janik. I am one of the engineers on the Angular framework team, and I am super excited to be hosting this party and to have you all join us to talk about all the great featurettes and improvements included in version 14. Before we get to that, though, I just wanted to say it's June, which means Happy Pride, everyone. I'm definitely celebrating, and I hope your Pride Month is wonderful too. Speaking of Pride, we're very proud to have launched Angular version 14 last week, Wednesday. This is one of the most feature-packed releases we've actually seen in a while, and we're super excited about it. We know you all are too. So let's talk about it. And to do so, I'd like to introduce Angular's engineering manager, Christina Brink. Christina, welcome. Tell us what's new in Angular version 14.
Thanks, Jessica. Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Brink, and I'm an engineering manager on the Angular team. We're super excited to announce the release of Angular version 14. This release includes highly anticipated updates to core parts of the Angular experience, including typed forms and standalone components, as well as developer experience updates, accessibility improvements, tooling updates, and bug fixes. V14 is packed with great updates, so without further ado, let's talk more about them. Our team's been working hard on ways to make it easier to write Angular applications. We want developers getting started with our framework to face fewer new concepts when they're learning Angular. We believe that standalone components are a great starting point. With this update, developers can now create new components for applications without requiring an ng module to make things work. Let's take a look at an example. Developers can now take advantage of new streamlined APIs that reduce configuration and get you right into building your next great application. Here we have a user profile component with an inline template. To make this component a standalone component, we just need to add the standalone component attribute with a value of true. The component doesn't require a module and can be used in other standalone components or in components written with ng modules. The standalone features also extend to directives and pipes. Over the coming months, we'll continue to build schematics and tooling to further refine the APIs and the developer experience. Standalone components are currently in developer preview. Please try them out and give us feedback on what you think. Our number one GitHub issue was a request to bring types to Angular forms. So we're incredibly happy to announce that type forms are now available for use in version 14. Reactive forms bring powerful type checking at compile time to help developers catch errors before they impact end users' experience with Angular applications. Here's an example typed form using a form group to capture details about everyone's favorite domestic pet, cats. The form has two fields, a string name and numeric lives. Using typed forms, we can find common errors such as accessing a property that is not available on a type, such as the substring function on the numeric lives property. Accessing a property that doesn't exist, like email. Or setting the value for the form group, but missing required properties. Typed forms is implemented in a backwards compatible way that uses schematics to move existing projects forward. We know that the community has been eagerly awaiting this feature, so we're very, very excited to have it now available in version 14. Best practices are really important and a core part of what makes Angular special to the developer community, and we're continuing to support them. Our new change detection guide on angular.io will help developers build high-quality applications with best practices in mind. If you'd like to learn more, please check out the Angular docs for more information. Another best practice is to ensure that your app compiles with accessibility standards, even with the page title of routes in your Angular app. Thanks to the fantastic contribution from Marko Stanimirovic, the Angular router now supports the new strongly typed route title. Let's talk about some developer experience tooling updates. The Extended Diagnostics plugin provides developers with more actionable compile time insights while authoring Angular code. Right now, we've shipped 2 great compile time checks. Developers can catch the all too common banana in a box error where the order of parentheses and brackets is inverted, causing a tricky to diagnose error. This is recognized with, as we said, it's where you actually have the brackets inside of the parentheses. So we name this banana in a box because you have parentheses that sort of look like a banana and brackets that sort of look like a box. And so the banana should go in the box because it doesn't make sense for a box to go in a banana, of course. The tooling also identifies instances where non-nullable values are being used unnecessarily with the nullish coalescing operator in Angular templates. This tooling is meant to be flexible and extensible, and we're working hard to bring more extended diagnostics to Angular and looking to introduce a way for communities to create their own. So stay tuned for future updates on this. Another important best practice is to ensure that your app complies with accessibility standards. Developers can enjoy even more built-in improvements that have shipped with v14, and some of these updates have come from our fantastic Angular community. Thanks to Ramesh Thiruchelvam, we now have a new runtime error codes. This also opens up the path for the build optimizer to tree shake error messages from production bundles. Thanks to another community contribution from Zach Elliott, developers can now bind to protected component members, providing more control over the public API for reusable components. And finally, thanks to Artur Androvich, updates to ng module on push ensure that changes are reflected in the UI for components. And now let's talk about some updates to CDK primitives and Angular tooling. The Component Dev Kit, better known as the CDK, provides a whole suite of tools for building Angular components. In v14, the CDK menu and dialog have both been promoted to stable, which provides users with a great foundation for building components using these 2 primitives. There are also new primitives available in the CDK. These new primitives can be used to create more accessible custom components based on the ARIA menu and menu bar design patterns. New methods have been added to the harness loader to check if a harness is present and to return the harness instance if it is present. And by the way, harnesses are a great way if you're doing migrations for components to help with that process. Now, on to some of the newly available features of the Angular CLI. The Angular CLI has some great new features dropping in v14 that we think you're really going to like. Commands like ngserve and more can now be auto-completed on the command line with the new ng completion feature, which will auto-complete common commands for you, which sometimes have been misspelled in the past. The new ng cache command provides a way to control and display cache information, including enabling, disabling, and deleting the cache. We've updated the analytics command to more clearly communicate your analytics configuration. We use this data to help inform our project prioritization, so it is really helpful when it's enabled. But that is not all. We have even more updates. Here are a few more that we've included in v14. Angular DevTools now works offline thanks to a community contribution from Keith Lee and is available to use in Firefox. We've also updated the toolings to use TypeScript 4.7. And finally, we're introducing an experimental ESBuild-based system for ng-build. Please give it a try and share your feedback. We are so excited for all of these amazing v14 updates. For an even more detailed look at the release, please check out our blog at blog.angular.io for more information. Thank you so much to everyone who contributed to our v14 release. We are so excited for you to try out our v14 updates, and please let us know what you think. Back to you, Jessica.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina. That was wonderful. Next we have Emma, who's going to come in, and we're going to do a QA panel. Emma, welcome, and also welcome to your wonderful kitty. I would love to see more of your kitty. Just lots of kitty time. Anyway, take it away.
Okay. I'll be asking the questions, not rhubarb today. But first, I want to welcome everyone to the screen and do some introductions. So as Jessica said, my name is Emma Twersky, and I'm a developer relations engineer on the Angular team, which means that I get to look at all the great stuff that the rest of the team here does and share it with you all, our community. But first, let's meet some of the developers that actually wrote the features that we're going to be talking about. So let's go down the line. Christina and Jessica already introduced themselves, but Doug, do you want to give like a short intro on who you are?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Doug. I'm the tech lead for the tooling team, where we did a lot of awesome stuff for v14 that I'm sure we'll talk about, and really excited about all of it. So happy to be here and chat about more of that.
And Dylan and Alex, the combined two.
Yes, hello. My name is Alex Rickabaugh. I'm the technical lead of the Angular framework team. And I also worked on the crew of Angular developers who implemented standalone components for v14.
And hi, everybody. My name is Dylan Hun. I'm a software engineer on the Angular framework team. And I worked largely on typed forms, which is part of Angular 14. So I'm really excited to share that with you.
And finally, Joey. Nope, maybe not. Joey, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sorry, your video cut out for me right as you started talking. Sorry about that. Hi, I'm Joey Parrott. I lead our internal developer infrastructure for ourselves for how we go about building Angular itself and how the community is able to contribute to the Angular project.
Awesome, thank you. So I have some pre-written questions for our Q&A, and I know we have a solid amount of time to do this. But if you are watching and you have a question about version 14, feel free to throw it in the chat and we will be asking a bunch of those. But we're going to start out with something really broad. So going down the line, maybe like in 5 words for everybody, what is your favorite thing in the version 14 release? And I'm going to make this a little bit more complicated and say not the thing that you specifically worked on. So what is your favorite thing in version 14? Let's start. Christina, do you want to start?
Yes, definitely. My favorite part of v14 is the typed forms, because I know it was a GitHub issue we've had for a while and that we had people from the community helping with. And I know Dylan put a lot of work into it, and super happy to see that it's launched for v14. So that's why I think it was a great community contribution and collaboration between the community and our team.
Yeah, 100%. Who wants to go next? Jessica? Oh, okay. We'll go with Alex and Dylan. We'll popcorn to the people that did typed forms. Not typed forms, what was your favorite thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think my favorite thing is probably auto-completion for the Angular CLI. I think it's really nice to just be able to mash tab.
Mine is binding to protected component members. This is a change that we've wanted to do for a while, but it always seemed kind of very complex and hard to implement in a performant way. But one of our other contributors, Joost Kuhorn, who we've worked with for a long time, came up with this really clever, ingenious way of making this work in the template type checker, like very efficiently, and was able to show that to Zach Elliott. And he went ahead and just implemented it in like 10 lines of code. It's beautiful. So lots of good community contributions in 14, but that one is definitely my favorite.
Yeah, I think that one, the code also looks really simple. If you look at the examples of what Alex is talking about, like, yeah, just being thoughtful about APIs is a big thing. Okay, I'll popcorn to Doug since we mentioned CLI, auto-completion. Doug, what is your favorite thing in version 14?
So I definitely like all of those. I'm really loving the CLI, the auto-completion. It's really nice just not have to think about that stuff. But to mention one that people haven't said already, I'm really excited about, we have a new experimental builder for building your application with ES Build. I'm going to say build one more time because I didn't say it enough in that sentence. and really excited about that. It's making things a lot faster, making things more modern, using proper ECMAScript modules for the whole part of the process, and makes things a lot faster. And we're really excited about the sort of the speed improvements that we've started to see, and really excited to see how that impacts the community, what kind of benefits you all see, and then also we're hoping to push that out more into the CLI and use it a little bit more broadly and get that more into your local development workflow, get things a lot faster for you. So really excited about all that.
Yeah, and then let's see. I'm gonna go to Jessica. It looks like Joey is talking to someone. Jessica, what's your favorite?
For me, it's definitely standalone components. There's been such a huge effort going on across teams to get this to where it is, and I'm just excited that it like really simplifies the mental model for Angular as a whole, and it's just huge. It's a huge thing.
Yeah, it is. I'm impressed that we named so many other things. It just proves how feature rich this version is, that we named everything until we got to somebody saying standalone. I will also say saying that you can't say something you worked on probably helped, because a lot of people here worked on standalone in some capacity. Let's see. Okay, so let's go to, I see in the chat people are mentioning their favorite things, and I'm seeing the word typed forms a lot. I actually saw a question that I want to highlight that will tie into this question, and that is, what is typed forms? And so, Dylan, do you want to answer what is typed forms? And then, Mark, if you can bring up that other question as well. But what is typed forms, and what did you learn implementing typed forms?
Sure. So what is typed forms? Historically, when you've used Angular forms, it's relatively unsafe. And what I mean by that is when you're accessing the data inside of your form, we don't know anything about the shape of the data. So if you have a form group with some fields inside and you try to access those fields, we can't do anything from a TypeScript perspective historically to make sure that you're interacting with this data using the correct types or using the correct names. And with type forms, we are trying to solve this problem. So now the compiler knows about the shape of all the data inside your form. And if you try to access a field that doesn't exist, we can warn you about it. Or as you're typing, we can offer to automatically complete the controls inside of your group, for example. And sort of it does a lot more than this, but this is sort of the principal reason for implementing type forms is improved safety and an improved developer experience when working with forms. And this has been like a top request for a really long time. I think it was the #1 issue on the Angular issue tracker. So that's sort of the background on why we implemented it. As for, I think the second question was, what was the biggest thing I learned implementing typed forms? So I think there's sort of a whole set of surprises around backwards compatibility, where the way the forms library works today is, in some ways, it can be a little bit surprising. It doesn't necessarily lend itself to writing the most type-safe code. For example, as we discussed in the blog post and in the new type forms user guide, which you should totally check out, there's a collection of issues surrounding null safety, where basically whenever you reset a control, the control immediately becomes null. And trying to figure out what exactly is the right way to make the type system reflect this while still have it be safe and useful, I would say was probably the biggest challenge surrounding implementing type forms. So yeah, that was a big learning area.
Yeah, I think that's great. And you actually have a blog post on some of these learnings on the blog.angular.io if people want to go check out any of that. As well as there's docs on typed forms on our docs page. Let's see. Just staying in the type forms realm, we have a question from Glyson, which is, why was it not included? Let's see. Why was it not included a type in typed forms to build a typed form based on another type or an interface?
So I assume what you're asking here is, let's say you have an existing interface, like a person interface, which might have like a key for name, a key for age, and you want to automatically generate a form schema based on this. And the short answer is that you can actually do this without help from Angular. You can use a feature of TypeScript called a mapped type to generate the corresponding forms type for your interface type. But we are actually considering including a type out of the box that will do this in future versions of Angular. But I will say it's not a necessity. You can use map types to generate a forms type from an interface type. You can also go the other direction, actually, using a map type, although it's you do have to make some inferences about, for example, whether an object corresponds to a group. But generally, you can do it.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why we didn't do this up front is if you give us an interface person, and suppose person has address, which is an object, we don't actually know whether you intend to represent this in your form as like a form group with individual address properties, street and city and whatnot, or whether you have some control out there that you're pulling from a third-party library that exposes itself as kind of a single control that has an object value, which would be a form control of like an address type object.
Yeah. One example of a context in which you see this is people who have like custom date picker controls. This is considered by the form system frequently to be a single form control, but the value that it returns is often an object. And so it's not generally safe to assume that just because it's an object, it must be a form group. So you can probably get results that are a little better for your specific use case if you sort of bring your own wrapper type.
Yeah, I think this applies right now. We have a banner running of ng update, but you can use this right now. And in fact, just one more question on type forms since we're here. Form builder API versus new form groups, form controls. Recommendations?
Yeah, so sort of short, maybe like sort of cheaty recommendation to this question is you should use whatever you're comfortable using today. The point of type forms is not to force you to change things about how you chose to implement your application. It's just to bring more type safety to whatever you did before. But sort of that aside, if you're going to pick one or the other for a new forms app, I would probably go with Form Builder, just because it's a little bit more concise.
And it's a lot easier to create non-nullable controls with the form builder, because we have the non-nullable form builder that you can just use, and it gives you non-nullable controls the entire time. Whereas if you call new form group a new form control, you kind of have to tell each one that you want to use the non-nullable interface.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great summary of they both exist for different reasons, like all coding choices. Okay, moving on from typed forms, I want to talk about, let's see. Oh, I don't know what that is. I want to talk about ESBuild and dev infra and all of the things, maybe group together Joey and Doug a little bit. But Joey, the most public thing that I think was in the blog post was that we have renamed our GitHub branches. And I know that a ton of work went into that. What are some of your favorite things that went into dev infra in version 14? What are some of your favorite things that went into dev infra?
I'm going to guess that your screen froze for me again. I don't know why our connection here just doesn't want to play nicely. But my favorite things about what we've done within our development infrastructure is just, much like Doug, I will say build a lot. The way that we build our deliverable packages on NPM, we've done a lot to standardize for ourselves how we're doing things, as well as to standardize the experience of contributing to Angular. So we use a common tool set, and we're creating more and more shareable things so that we can spend less time worrying about our infrastructure and more time being able to actually do the great work of actually building Angular itself. And with that comes kind of what we talked about with ESM, which is my favorite part of version 14, is it is us helping to push the ecosystem along to the modern ECMAScript modules rather than having to rely on what we've done before.
Yeah, 100%. It's the best work is that we don't see any of it and we just benefit from it without ever doing it or working with it, essentially. You're just under the hood. Cool. Let's see. So now I want to move on to Doug and talk about developer diagnostics. So tell us a little bit about what developer diagnostics are. And let's say I ng update and I open a v14 application in VS Code. Like what are developer diagnostics doing? Like how am I seeing those when I code?
Yeah, so essentially in version 13.2, but kind of talking about a little bit more in 14, we've launched a new feature called Extended Diagnostics. And what these do is they provide a little bit more insight into your build and sort of notifying you where you might be making certain error-prone patterns or doing things that they could be resulting in bugs that you just haven't noticed yet. And so these kind of show as compiler warnings that we'll list on your templates. You'll see these in the Angular language service if you're using VS Code. You'll also see these in the compiler. So when you just run ng build or ng serve, you'll see them out there. And they list out some common things. The most significant one that I point to is that it will tell you if you get your banana and box backwards. So if you do a two-way binding and you put the parentheses and brackets backwards, it'll flag that and warn you about it, since that's something that historically the compiler has allowed, but usually isn't what you wanted and is most likely a mistake that you've made. So we're able to call that out, be much more upfront about it. We also have very detailed error messages explaining exactly what's wrong. We have some great documentation on AIO about these different diagnostics, why they're bad, what you can do to fix them. And it's something that we want to be extending in the future and trying to including more diagnostics, call out more things that that might be wrong or error prone in your code and what you can do to fix them. So that's kind of a general overview of the feature, and really excited to finally be able to ship this and talk about it more broadly.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just add a kind of practical note on this. So in standalone components, we've been looking a lot at the experience of migrating an existing ng module-based component to standalone. And one of the great things about this is you can use the compiler to kind of help you. So if you make the component standalone and try to build it, Angular's template type checking will complain about, like, we can't find mat button and we can't find mat icon. And you kind of get hints on what I need to add to the standalone component imports to make this work. But one of the problems there is if you have kind of directives that match against attributes, a common example being something like ngIf, which is actually just an attribute directive on like an ng template. It is perfectly legal for you to have attributes in your elements that don't match anything. But clearly, like if you put ngIf, you probably meant to use the ngIf directive. And so we're actually adding an extended diagnostic to make this case more visible to you, where if you have an attribute that looks like it's supposed to match a directive that's in your system, but that doesn't actually, you haven't imported the right thing to make that work, we can kind of raise our hand a little bit and tell you from the compiler side and a warning that, like, hey, it looks like you're trying to use ngIf here, but you haven't actually imported the right module to make that happen. So it's a case where, like, we don't necessarily know that it's 100% wrong, but we're pretty sure that it's a pattern that you didn't mean to do. And so it's a great use case for an extended diagnostic and should be in 14.1.
Yeah, looking forward to having all those little better things we can do to improve a lot of the experience there.
Yeah, I think that's great. I am super excited about, I have a bunch of issues open for future diagnostics I want. So I think it's like, we have highlighted that extended diagnostics are cool and we've brought a few of them, but mostly we've introduced, I think, a really cool pattern for the future. And, TypeScript is great. So is anything that helps me not write errors, because I write bad code. Let's see. I think we're moving on to some community questions. I saw a few around. Oh, okay, here we go. Are we going to have better syntax highlighting support for inline templates and style templates in VS Code? So talking about language services, talking about better code editor experiences. What are people's thoughts on this?
It should work in the modern language service. So if you're on a project that's like using Ivy or v13 or beyond, inline templates definitely should have syntax highlighting, inline styles too, I believe. So if it's not working, please open an issue with a reproduction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think jumping off of that, I'll go to, is there a smooth migration to version 14? There's always something new in every version, which is true. Every major version has something cool. This is definitely feature packed. A lot of these features we've been talking about are interoperable with everything, or actually all of them that we've been talking about are fully interoperable and backwards compatible. So for example, typed forms, if you update to version 14, you're being migrated to untyped forms. We're making sure that you can update super smoothly. So if you want to update, including your language service, how would you go about doing that? Does somebody want to walk me through how I would update an app?
I can jump in and say the easiest way is just run ng update. That will basically do everything that you would want to do and more. Got lots of cool stuff there, as Emma kind of mentioned. It'll even migrate over your forms usage to sort of annotate things as in sort of an untyped manner, because that's what you currently have, but then give you an easy way to look and find and see what are instances of my forms where I can improve things and be able to update them. And just sort of getting all kinds of new features and new things, just being able to really seamlessly move your application over. And not just bumping version numbers, but actually like being able to modify your source code and actually switch you over to a lot of these new APIs, which is where a lot of the value comes in. So it's always the best and easiest way to get updated to the next version.
Yeah.
There's also update.angular.io, which I saw just got added to the screen here. But that will kind of ask you some simple questions about your application and give you kind of a checklist of things to do to prepare for the update. Maybe there's certain APIs that were actually removed that have been deprecated that you need to make sure you're just not using anymore. And then it'll give you kind of the commands to run to update the application and run all of the migrations.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing I was going to throw on, because I think everyone answered it exactly how I would have, is in VS Code or whatever code editor, just making sure you update your language service as well, since we release a new language service with each new major version as well, and minors. Cool. I saw some really good questions about components, and specifically, Christina, you talked about binding to protected components. So Christina and/or Alex, what are the benefits of being able to bind to a protected component member?
Yeah, I would love to take this. So there's a couple schools of thought on what the relationship is between a template and a component. There's the attitude that the template is something separate that's like just reading kind of from the component's API in order to display the UI. And there's the thought that like the component and the template, the component class and the template are really part of the same encapsulation boundary. And I think we tend to lean towards the latter. And where this really shows is in the case of components which are intended to be reusable, like the material component suite. So Material is very careful about what APIs they actually want to expose from their component classes, because some of them are meant to be injected or meant to be accessed kind of programmatically, like the overlays and the sidebar navigation and things like that. Often there are APIs where you interact with it, not through bindings, but through just calling methods on the component class. And components like that may not want to expose all of the information that are needed by their templates to render as part of their public API. So being able to make certain members protected in the TypeScript sense, where you can't access them as a consumer kind of injecting the component class and interacting with it, but the template can still use that data to render the component, is very useful.
Yeah, 100%. Let's see. Is there any important breaking change? I think, again, we talked about this before, but update.angular.io actually goes through every breaking change in the repository. So based on your answers in that app, that will highlight that. Are there any breaking changes anyone wants to highlight? Silence is, oh, okay, go for it.
Yeah, we do try really hard not to actually break you. Basically, every major change will have an accompanying migration. For example, it's been brought up a few times, but with forms, we'll opt you out of the new types, and you can opt back in at your own pace. They're usually like a smattering of fairly small things. For example, one bug that we fixed in Angular 14 is the HTTP client now correctly encodes the plus sign in query parameters, which there's not really any way to migrate out of that. It's just sort of a small breaking change. But for the most part, those kinds of breaking changes shouldn't really impact you unless you have a pre-existing bug. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that.
No, I think that's perfect. I can attest to the fact that working with all of these developers, like it is almost annoying how much we don't allow breaking changes without at least a path forward. And half of the conversation around like we want to do a new feature is, okay, how will we make sure that this feature doesn't break any existing code that possibly is out there? So I think type forms are a great example. If you ng update and like start to migrate over, like the backwards compatibility is incredibly impressive there. Let's see, we have a bunch of comments of celebrations that I think are worth highlighting. I also liked Happy Angular 14. Let's see, and some more emojis. I love it. If you send your favorite emoji, we'll put those on the screen. Let's see, and because I believe we have like 10-ish minutes left, and so obviously we've saved maybe the most questioned or the most commonly talked about thing for last, which is standalone components. So let's see if I can find a good question to transition. But I had one. Why should we be excited about standalone components?
I love this question. I think there's a few reasons why you should be excited about it. One is generally the kind of reduced boilerplate. So I've written Angular apps personally, and I've helped a lot of people within Google write Angular applications. And one of the hardest things to explain to people generally is like, which module should I put a component in? Because there's different kind of architectures that applications take. Do they want a single module? Do they want a shared module? Do they want something like the SCAM pattern where you have a module for each individual component? And standalone just completely like eliminates that as a concern. You're able to kind of write applications and not have to think about this whole ng module structure behind the scenes. Everyone kind of on the team, we had kind of a day where we tried out standalone components and migrated apps to it. And then there have been people working on other features completely unrelated to standalone who just like, you need to write a test for this thing. And they reach for standalone components instead of using ng modules in their tests because it's faster. And everyone who's done that has kind of had the same feedback that like, wow, this is way easier to think about. So that's one reason, is just the kind of reduced boilerplate. There are also things which are possible now that were either not possible or very complex to get working correctly before, that we can do thanks to standalone. And one example of this is the load component API in the router, where you can just ask Angular to lazy load a component for a route with zero ceremony associated with it. Whereas before, this was a whole dance involving writing an ng module that you were going to load, and that ng module would have to make sure to correctly import the components module. You'd have to set up a child route for it. There was this whole set of hoops that you had to jump through around lazy loading a component. If you're in an environment where you're trying to use micro front ends, again, this is a case where it is easier to build and use standalone components and load them as part of a micro front end than it is to kind of go through the dance of writing an ng module wrapper and making sure you load the right modules in the right context. So to answer Amit's question here, yes, it is possible. We have both the load component API for doing it, and it's much easier to just write like ES dynamic import to a standalone component and use it directly.
Yeah, I'm throwing all the questions on the screen that you're answering at as you're answering this. But I mean, there's a ton of benefits. And as of right now, it's not that you have to go write only standalone components. But there are a bunch of benefits for, maybe why you would want to go start exploring that. And again, backwards compatibility. There's been a lot of effort put into making sure that standalone components and standalone directives and standalone pipes play nicely with modules and the current ecosystem. Let's see. So I think there's a lot of questions about sort of like build size or like build time, bundle size, things like that of standalone. Can you talk a little bit about like tree shaking and standalone and the story there?
Yes, absolutely. There's kind of a simple answer and a more complex answer. The simple answer is, in most cases, it actually shouldn't make a difference. Angular is actually quite good at optimizing away ng modules and the cost of ng modules at runtime. And so standalone generally does not move the needle there. But there is kind of a caveat there, which is if you have components that are kind of self-referential, like you have two components that like maybe a tree component and a tree node or something that are recursive. If you do this with ng modules, the compiler actually kind of detects that you have import cycles, and it'll go out of its way to hide that from the bundler. And what actually happens behind the scenes is we kind of give up on tree shaking a little bit in order to make this work correctly at runtime in all circumstances. And standalone components kind of allow us to not have to do that kind of de-optimization. So if you have cycles with standalone components, you can be a little bit more intentional about like, I want the imports to happen in this order, and then the tree shaker can actually deal with tree shaking that component, even though it's part of like a reference cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great summary of, again, like a very consistent ecosystem with a very exciting new feature. Let's see. So what does this do? I saw a few questions about what this does with shared modules and shared components. So how does this impact the shared module pattern, and what do we now do about sharing components like controls across maybe multiple components?
Sure. So there's shared module is a little bit ambiguous. There's a couple of different ways people use shared modules. One is to kind of collect a bunch of dependencies, like, you know, you may have a material shared module that has all of the material components that you're using re-exported. This pattern will still continue to work with standalone components if you would like to use it. So you can import your shared module in a standalone component, and it will get access to everything that's exported by that module. Another way I've seen people use shared modules is to kind of just collect a bunch of common components in their application and declare them all in the same module. You can still do that and use that module from other standalone components if you want, or you can decompose that module into a bunch of independent standalone components and manage their dependencies directly. Another thing that you can do is you don't actually have to use an ng module in order to share dependencies between standalone components. You can just make an array. So you can have an array of like shared imports of all the dependencies that you want to import, and you can reference that array in the imports of all your standalone components, and that will work as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. Okay, so standalone, typed forms, ES build, ES modules, protected members. I mean, quite a bit. I think the question, and I saw it somewhere here, is what is next? So there was a question about the roadmap, but Christina, can you talk a little bit about what is next on the Angular roadmap and version 15 through version 4000? I don't know, whatever. What's next for Angular, and what does the roadmap look like now? Oh, Christina, can we hear you?
Sorry, I think I was muted still. Sorry. I think that what we've seen in like v14 is just so many aspects and so many places where we can focus on for v15, and we're still figuring out a lot of that. We're still thinking about what makes the most sense, but I know some of the things that we're looking into right now are hydration. We're also looking into server-side rendering. We're looking into state management and the future of zones. So those are the big things that we're looking at. But there's so many other things that we're considering. It's not really finalized yet what we're fully going to have. And also some like build and speed improvements. But those are the major pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to put the link to the roadmap in the chat, but that was also updated if you're interested in some more detail in everything that Christina just talked about. And that's it for the questions. I'm going to pass it back to Jessica. But thank you, everyone who asked questions and joined from, I think I counted every continent except Antarctica, obviously. But we'll find a dev there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, everybody who came to answer questions. Huge thank you to the Angular team. Thank you to all of our community members and contributors. Thank you for everyone for sharing all of the great featurettes of version 14. I want to especially call out our international attendees in our audience today. We saw, like Emma called out, people from every continent. We're so glad you're here. Again, happy Pride, everyone. And that's pretty much all we have. But before I sign off, I just want to say, take care of yourselves, everyone. You're all wonderful people. You deserve the best. Be true to yourselves. Live your best lives. Thank you again for joining, and live long and prosper, everyone.